Boris Johnson, welcome to the Dispatch podcast.
Jamie, it's a great honor to be on your show. Thank you very much for having me.
Even though I went to grad school in London, I actually am not sure the convention. Is it okay if I call you Mr. Prime Minister? I know in the United
No,
States.
no. We're in Britain. We have no such honorifics after we leave office. We're toenails. We're the detritus of history, and we don't. Nobody retains their titles. And I think it's quite a weird thing. If you go to America, even mayors now seem to retain their titles after they leave office, and municipal dog catchers, and it's wonderful. But no, I'm just call me Boris is fine. Boris.
I'll try to do that. It's hard for me to do that considering you were prime minister. But Boris, I want to begin with I think a topic that I know in other profiles you hate to talk about it, and it's the man versus the performative aspect of your character, of your political life. And I want to begin because I'm so excited to bring up this story my favorite story that I read about you that I have never seen you comment on. And I want to know if it gives a lens into the man versus the character. There's a man I'm not familiar with, I think you are, named Jeremy Vine at The Spectator. So he wrote, though, an article, Boris, in The Spectator.
Yes.
And it talks about a speech that you and him had together. You were both on a platform for some organization, and you come in 3 minutes late. He says you come to him and go, "What is this event about?" It looks like you have no idea what the event is about. You go on, you kind of take the menu on the back of the menu, write down some notes, go on stage. Even though he told you what the event conference name was, you act like you don't know what it is still. You had to look and say it was. He says he spoke as if every sentence had only just occurred to him, and a new thought came with a surprise. He said the audience loved it. He was totally impressed. Then you brought up a story I never heard of, but it's supposedly famous in Britain, of a gentleman named George Brown. And there's three elements of the story. You tell the first one, you tell the second one, and then you get to the third one, the punchline, and all of a sudden you forget it. But the crowd loves it. He couldn't believe it. They just loved it. And he thought, this is a great politician. No one can do this. This is amazing. Then he tells a story. 18 months later, he's slated to speak with you at a conference again. You ask, what is this conference about? You go on stage, you don't remember the name. You tell the story about George Brown. You tell the first one, you tell the second one, and you forget the third one again, and the conference loves it. He concludes, I realized that those two Boris speeches had made me pose the fundamental question, the one that concerns most when you listen to about a politician. Is this guy for real? Tell me about that story, Boris. Tell me, is this kind of the performative aspect of your job that you know what turns people on and gets them excited?
No, I think tragically it's just a function of giving loads of speeches. It's a bit like your tutor at university, or your one of your favorite lecturers. You sometimes you listen to them and you ask them a question, and they just go to whatever their favorite anecdote is, and they will always kind of trip up in the middle and come and make the same mistakes. And I think it's just the way the brain is wired. I think it's possible. I mean, I'll tell you the Lord George Brown story, right? If you really want to, it's actually a true story, and it was about a guy called Lord George Brown, who was a very famous UK politician. He was foreign secretary. He got drunk a lot. And he one time he pitched up at a soiree in a I think it was in Peru, and the band strikes up. This is the story anyway. Lord George Brown spies across the room a creature clad in gorgeous, sinuous scarlet, and drunk though he may be, he sashays across the room and says, "Madam, may I have the honor of this waltz?" To which the apparition replies, "Kind sir, there are three reasons why I can't accede to your request. The first is that you are drunk. The second, this is not a waltz, but the Peruvian national anthem. And the third is that I am the Cardinal Archbishop of Lima. And this story never fails to succeed, containing as it does the essential elements of great comedy, drag, gender, religion, and drunk politicians. So it's got everything in it. And I guess I got used to telling that story. You can't get away with it anymore. I did tell it once, actually. I told it once in Lima, Peru, funnily enough, where it didn't go down particularly well. But I think the answer to your question is that it's a good gag. And probably what Jeremy Vine heard was me robotically repeating a performance that had worked well before. But I'm afraid to say, and this is the really terrifying fact, you could probably hear me repeating over the years in which I made a virtually identical speech to dozens and dozens of audiences. You probably could have heard that gag many times. But that's the way of these things.
One profile wrote about you, when controversy engulfed him, he emerged unscathed, in part because of, what some people have called, maybe not nicely, performative buffoonery. But the performative aspect is because you were a top student at Eton, you were at Oxford, and that the suggestion is that you have this persona that allows you to look like you're just waltzing through and not knowing what you're doing. That allows controversy to roll off your shoulder when it's actually an act. Is that a fair assessment? Of
course, it's an act, but the key thing is, I mean, everything. We're all, all the world's a stage, right? We're all trying to get over our message, what's in our heart, in the most effective way possible. And I find that the best way to do that is to try to sugar the pill, to leaven the loaf. You've got to keep people amused, and I absolutely defend that approach. And so in the book that I've written, Unleashed, I mean, some people have attacked it having too many jokes, but you've got to keep. But it sold a lot of copies, and that's because you've got to keep people reading, and you've got to keep people's attention. And when you're trying to get over some complicated ideas, you've got to have absolutely no embarrassment about using gags, using jokes, just to keep people listening. It is by far the most effective tool. Look at Ronald Reagan. Look at some old footage of Ronald Reagan. He's very unlike. I mean, he's like Trump in the sense that he tries to keep his audience amused, but Ronald Reagan actually tells jokes. I mean, joke after joke. And I think there's a didactic merit in that. If you want to keep people listening, it's your duty. It's your duty as a politician to try to entertain them as well.
And I highly recommend Unleashed. I read the whole thing, and we'll get to some more details of the book in a moment.
Shamefully, I don't have a copy to wave at our viewers, but I must have one somewhere.
I've seen you reject the comparison to, and I think it's right to reject it, that you are the British Donald Trump. But let me ask you,
go on. Yeah.
What would you make of the comparison that you are the British Trump meets Newt Gingrich, kind of a combination of those two figures in the American scene?
Look, I think that I come from a standpoint. I'm basically a libertarian, conservative. I want lower tax, but the thing that drives me is a frustration about our country at the moment, about the UK, and I think it's got enormous potential. And I think individuals in the UK have got enormous potential. And what I'm trying to say in Unleashed is, I'm really trying to get over a message about what we need to do to unleash the potential of the whole of the UK. That's to say, cities, towns, communities across all of the UK, which are not as productive as London and the South East, and which could be. And also about unleashing the potential of the UK globally, and Brexit's a part of that solution. And this is born of just observing other countries. The United States of America is going gangbusters at the moment by comparison with Europe, certainly with the UK, and it has an extraordinary richness and strength across so many of its states, and virtually every state in the USA has a dynamic tech sector, a great university, or do you know what I mean? I mean, it's all happening everywhere. And in the UK, for decades and decades and decades after the Second World War, we allowed the wealth and the productivity to be concentrated in London and the Southeast. And actually, we're much more imbalanced than most other European economies. France, Germany, Italy, their great provincial cities tend to be far more productive than the second-tier cities of the UK. And so what gets me, and I found as mayor of London, I had great success in getting the whole city to become more prosperous and to leveling up, right? So socialists level down, okay? Socialists, the Labour government that's in now, they level down. They chop off tall poppies. They're Pol Pot, literally. They're happy. They put a 20% tax on education. We're the only country in Europe now to have a tax on, by putting VAT, value-added tax on education, on private education. And you know, our viewers may not know this, but in England now, in the UK, schools, good schools, are closing because of tax put on them by the government. And, you know, of course, you're not going to get any tax yield from a school that's closed, right? And the kids that were at that school are going to be educated at the charge of the taxpayer at state schools now. So it's economically stupid, but it's basically driven by resentment of private enterprise, of the private sector, of private education. That's what I call, and of the achievements of private schools. And it's driven by chippiness and resentment, and that is leveling down. That's what socialists do, right? What I want to do, and what I believe the country should be doing, what our country should be doing, is leveling up, spreading opportunity everywhere, because there is talent everywhere, right? There is genius everywhere in every part of the UK, and so the mission of politicians, in my view, is to give the opportunities to people throughout the UK. So that's the story of the book. That's what Unleashed is largely about.
And you write a lot about leveling up in the book, Unleashed, but you also talk about Donald Trump, who you served with while he was president and you were prime minister.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've talked to him since the election and talked about, perhaps getting his support for another run for prime minister.
Oh, well, no. Look, I mean, I certainly talked to him a few times, and I'm very, very friendly with Donald Trump, and you know, I got a lot of respect for what he's doing, and frankly, I'm a kind of a bit of an outlier in European politics, in the sense that I kind of view his election with the stirrings of optimism. You know, I think, come on, I think there are some things here that can be unblocked, and you know, you look at what's happening in the markets, look at the positivity about the United States, and I think that's justified. I think I look back at his time in government when I was foreign secretary, and then when I was prime minister. You know, he was much better on a lot of the key dossiers than the left liberal consensus would like to make out. You know, he was strong. He was good on Ukraine, actually. He gave the Ukrainians weapons. He gave them the Javelin shoulder-launched missiles. He was good on Iran. He was good on Syria, and he was good on the economy. So, you know, I'm positive, and you know, I hope to be coming to the inauguration in a few days' time, and to see him in person.
What do you talk to him about post-election? Does he ask you for advice on foreign policy? What is usually the conversations about?
I think probably I ought to respect the privacy of the conversations and not to go into the details. But
Uh,
I'm sure
Fair enough.
it's pretty predictable stuff.
What do you make
I mean, I
of?
basically congratulated him, obviously,
Yeah.
on his outstanding success. And I think that, let's face it, a lot of people spend a lot of time and effort trying to prevent him from even getting on the ballot, right?
Yeah.
A lot of that lawfare was about trying to stop him getting on the ballot. And I think what they failed to see, all those lefties who were doing that, was they were really behaving in the same way as autocrats and tyrants around the world who try to stop their, who use bogus legal processes to jail their opponents or keep them from standing for election, right? I mean, there are plenty of African countries, plenty of countries in Latin America, around the world, where that kind of thing happens. And in those countries, we say it's despicable and wrong. And yet somehow, the liberal organs of opinion ask us to believe that, it was all, magnificent and above board. I think a lot of these cases were wholly vexatious and actually helped propel him back to power.
What do you make of what seems like a very serious proposal to at least negotiate Greenland to become part of the United States? Potentially invade. He hasn't taken that off the table. What do you make
Yeah,
of
I
that?
mean, look, I mean, sadly, I think it was a mistake. I mean, I would say this too. I think that it would be a great mistake for the United States to consider using any kind of force against Greenland, because Greenland is a member of NATO, and it's not a member of the EU, but it is a member of NATO, and therefore, were the United States were forced to be used to take Greenland, then a state of war would exist between the United States and the United Kingdom for the first time since I don't know 1812 or so, and that would not be an ideal situation. So I don't
If
think.
you were prime minister, would you enact? Oh, I think was it Article 5 of NATO? If the
Yeah,
United
I mean,
States went to war
I think
against,
everybody would. I mean, so it's just nuts, but that's not going to happen, right? So I don't think the president meant that for a second. I don't think he meant to. Um, I don't think he meant to say that the US would, and he doesn't need to. I mean, the fascinating thing about what's really happening in Greenland is that the United States is already so very close to achieving its objectives anyway. And if you listen to what the Greenlanders are themselves saying, there are only 56,000 of them, and as far as I understand the matter, they welcome closer relations with the United States. And far be it from me um, to suggest a course of action to Donald, but to the president elect. But if we've only 56,000 citizens of Greenland, it would be extremely cheap to if you gave each Greenlander $1 million, right? That you'd have an absolute steal, and you'd have one of the biggest purchases since Texas, and wholly strategically and economically justified. And you could write out a big check for Denmark as well. I don't think they should be. That would be fine too. Clearly they're saying no right now, but money talks. And what I'm trying to say here, James, I think this is something that is quite sensible to think about. At the very least, you could imagine a sort of condominium between Denmark and the United States, like Andorra or wherever. You could have some sort of joint rule. But you look at the map, look at what's happening to the world, look at the Arctic. I can see the logic of what the president is saying. Of course, it's for the Greenlanders to decide, and they should be able to decide. They decided to leave the EU. Don't forget, right? In 1988 or 87, I think it's like leave the EU. And um, you know there's a big movement for independence in Greenland, or quite a strong urge for independence. I think they might well be incentivized by a couple of $1 million a head, or $1 million. I mean, that's not to be sneezed at if you're a Greenlander living in Newark, not to be confused with Newark, New Jersey, or wherever.
One more section of questions before we get deep into the book. It's because Elon Musk has been becoming kind of a major figure, I think, in British politics over the last few weeks. First, have you ever met Elon Musk? And if so,
I've talked to him a few times. I've talked to him quite a. I've had some conversations with him, but I don't think we've. I met his brother Kimball, funny enough, when I was mayor of London. But I've never met Elon. I've talked to him, and we have a good friendly relationship over electronic means.
What do you make of these retweets he's been making, and tweets about Pakistani grooming gangs, rape gangs, I would call them, in London? How serious a problem is that?
I think he's got every right to have his views, and I think there's a certain amount of hysteria again in the liberal media about this. He reads stuff. He's appalled by it, and he's right. I mean, what happened with the Pakistani grooming gangs in so many towns in the UK was appalling, and perhaps it does indeed deserve a deeper investigation. I mean, I think one of the interesting things is the particular, news of the Oldham story. I think it was Oldham was where a councillor. It all started off again recently because a councillor in Oldham said he would back the Labour council leaders there if they agreed to another inquiry, I think, into the issue, and that's how it all got going again. I mean, I was Prime Minister for three years or so, and this was all very quiescent. I don't mean it never came up when I was.
Is it still going? Is it still going on?
But this is the issue. I don't know, but if it is, then it certainly deserves investigation. And I think, to your point, Elon Musk has every right to ventilate these issues, turn over the big flat rocks, see what's underneath. And this is a very, very smart guy. I mean, I do not, for the life of me, understand how this guy has the bandwidth to solve complicated engineering problems to do with getting rockets into space and making electric vehicles not catch fire, and understand the intricacies of British domestic politics as well. I mean, this guy must have he's got a total space brain. But why not? Why not? How does it harm our democracy?
Yeah. Of course,
outside. In fact, you know what I think? I think it's a compliment. I think it's a huge compliment to the little old U of K, to the little old us, that Elon, orbiting the planet wherever he is, greenlighting his gigantic deals for going to Mars, all the things he's thinking about. I think it's a huge compliment to the UK that he regards us and what happens in UK politics as so important. I happen to think that he is right. And if you listen to what Elon says, he says, well, the UK is important because it's the mother country of the whole Anglosphere, and it's the origins, whether our listeners in the United States, country of my birth, like this point or not, the UK, Britain, was the intellectual progenitor of many of the Anglo-Saxon ideas of freedom on which the United States is founded. We were the original colonial power, after all, and we've left our mark around the world for good or ill. And so Elon's point is, what happens in the UK matters to the world, and I think that's true. And I think it's frankly a good thing for Britain that you have somebody who is clearly a commercial genius, but also one of the greatest innovators of our time, taking the time and the trouble to focus on us. Like it's a compliment.
But Boris, if the reports are true, and I've seen numbers that are astounding if they're true
on the grooming gangs.
Yes. How did the UK come from a society that ruled the world, ruled every corner of the world, to a society that is afraid to speak up against children being raped because they would be accused of being racist?
But we of course the way we moved from being a society that ruled the world to a society with this particular type of problem is, of course, that the empire brought its children home, as it were, and over the last century or more, you've particularly since the Second World War, you've seen quite very considerable immigration into the UK, and it's no particular secret that some communities have had different success, different attitudes towards integration than others. And clearly, I mean, I'm not a great expert on this. As I say, it didn't really come up during my time. The whole issue was quiescent. But clearly, there has been and there may well still be a culture by which males of Pakistani origin have a particularly brutal, racist, and disdainful attitude towards young white girls.
But Boris, I'm asking more about British culture. Why is it now that they, according to these reports, were afraid to speak up about their children being raped because they would create discord in communities or be called racist? I mean,
that's pathetic. I mean, if that is true, then that is exactly what needs to come out. And I think the problem is that although there have been multiple inquiries about this, any attempt now to stop a big national inquiry into this will be read by people whose the parents, the families of the girls whose lives have been ruined by this, will be read as an attempt to frustrate a legitimate investigation for precisely that reason, for reasons of political correctness, because you're worried about stereotyping certain immigrant groups or whatever, and that is the trap. So I think we passed the point now. We obviously need to have this national inquiry.
Can I ask you just to respond to what was written in the Free Press? I don't know if you're familiar with the Free Press in the U.S. It's becoming a very budding organization started by Barry Weiss. Dominic Green, who I think writes for The Spectator, wrote in the Free Press on this subject. The conservatives were not much better, talking about the inquiries into this. Speaking of you, he said in 2019, shortly before he became conservative leader and prime minister, Boris Johnson complained that money spent investigating historic child abuse crimes was money spaffed up a wall.
Yeah, hang on. Those are two totally different things.
Okay, but let me just finish this sentence because there's two parts to it. In 2020, Johnson's Home Office suppressed the conservatives' own research on grooming gangs. Releasing it, they said, was not in the national interest.
Sorry. That's total. So you've got whoever wrote that piece doesn't know what they're talking about, because when I said money was being spaffed up the wall on a historic child abuse investigation or historic investigations into child abusers, that was a particular reference to an absolutely disastrous series of investigations into guys like Leon Britton, former Home Secretary, Dwin Bramall, former Chief of the Defence Staff. There was a particular guy who made a series of allegations against members of the British establishment of one kind or another, retired generals, former politicians, people like that. And what happened then was that the police, and this goes to your point about the political bias inherent in the whole thing. What happened was that they latched because they hadn't really done enough on the grooming gangs, and they were nervous about the racist implications of seeming to go too hard after this. And suddenly, they had this guy who was pointing the finger at the great white defendant, was pointing the finger at Leon Britton and these people of seemingly unimpeachable rectitude, and the police piled in. And what you had was a officer from, I think, Thames Valley Police said that these allegations were, I quote, credible and true. And they were nothing of the kind. They were completely false. And the guy who made them up was proved to be a complete liar. And the guy who backed him in Parliament, a guy called a Labour MP called Tom Watson, had to eat his words and apologise. The whole thing was absolutely disgusting and wrong. And that was what I was talking about. And of course, for reasons of political correctness, and in order to, to create a sort of false equivalence, it suited I think my gut is it suited the police to go after these old generals and what have you, when there was no case against them, when what they should have been doing was probably rounding up these grooming gangs. So that was that's the point I was making about don't splash more money up the wall on Leon Britton. Honestly, that guy, he died. He went to his grave, Leon Britton, with people thinking that he'd done things when he had not, and there was not a shred of evidence against him. It was a complete disgrace.
One last question on this, because many people on Twitter are seeing what Elon is tweeting in their feeds. Some of it are discovering these things for the first time. On one hand, we're seeing people who covered up grooming gangs or didn't want to speak out. On the other hand, we're seeing people arrested in the UK for going on social media and saying something that's, someone considers nasty under, I forget what law they have of the Section 127 of the Communications Act. Is it, and they're baffled about the UK they loved and known, the Churchill. I'm a Churchillite as well. I know you are. You wrote a book on it. They're baffled that this is what the UK is now. Is this what the UK is now, where people are not speaking up against grooming gangs, but getting arrested for making nasty posts on social media?
Look, I think that what happened was that a few people were certainly, got some pretty heavy sentences just for saying some incautious things on Twitter, and there's a thing you can do now. I think called a non-crime hate incident, where if you say something on Twitter, and this happened to a journalist called Alison Pearson. She tweeted or retweeted something, some image from a anti-Israeli demonstration or something, and the law came down very heavily on her, and the police came round to see her. And it is certainly true that people are being, a lot of people have been imprisoned for what they've said on Twitter. There've been more, several, as far as I know, several people have been imprisoned for what they've said on Twitter. And I think we are being too heavy-handed. And I wasn't in court to hear the cases. It's hard for me to judge. But there was one case of a mother who had no previous convictions for anything, who'd simply, in a fit of rage, sent something intemperate on Twitter. And I don't think she had any previous record of incitement or anything else like that. And she went to prison. Even though she was a mother with children, and she deleted it almost immediately afterwards, right? And you've got, at the same time, you've got Starmer letting out of prison people who've been convicted of very serious offences. And so, I can see why that people looking from abroad think, what the hell is going on? And I can understand why they feel there's an imbalance, and I can understand why they think, something's going on, and it does make it more difficult for people like me to argue that the UK is a land of free expression and liberty, when you have things like this. And also, it makes it easier for people like Vladimir Putin or whoever to say, to point the finger at us and say, "Tu quoque?" You say that we lock up journalists. Well, look at what you do. Alison Pearson gets a knock on the door just for retweeting something. You say that we have no free speech in Russia. Look at what you do. And so we're sawing off the branch we're sitting on. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, and it's the balance is wrong at the moment. But what I think, one of the reasons I'm optimistic about the Trump presidency is that I think that I think that the public is starting to turn against all this, and I think that not just in the US but in the UK too, and I think there's an impatience for a more robust, honest approach, and an impatience with wokery, and an impatience with the cancel culture, and with trying to shut people up the whole time. And I think that's going to be I may be wrong, but that's my impression. I think that's a good and healthy thing.
In the book, I was particularly fascinated by your foreign policy section. You call the UK a superpower of soft power, in contrast to being maybe a superpower of hard power anymore. Do you feel that there are, in some of the examples you give in the book about how, having to pay the Iranians in order to release a hostage, does being a superpower of soft power as opposed to hard power have consequences for Britain and the world? And I wonder what those consequences of not being a superpower of hard power have for the UK.
Don't forget, we're still a P5 nuclear power, and have probably more heavy lift than the rest of Europe put together. We're the second biggest military player in NATO. We spend more of our GDP on defense than most other European countries. We're not an inconsiderable hard power country, and where British troops are on active service in many places around the world. So I wouldn't entirely agree with your assertion that we wouldn't pull the skin off a rice pudding anymore. So number two, when it comes to paying for hostages to get out of Iran. I just remind you, the US has a long and illustrious history of this. Obama paid billions to get US hostages out of Iran. We didn't actually pay, or what we did was we unfroze some money that was Iranian.
You said in the book it was a clever trick that you took credit for coming up with a way so that it was a payment but not seen as a payment, right? It was
Iranian. I mean, the history of new readers, you got to read Unleashed, but the what really happened was that in 1979, when the Shah was overthrown, he was overthrown just after he'd done a huge tank deal with the United Kingdom, and we sold them 400 million quid's worth of tanks, and the Shah paid us the money, but then we didn't actually send the tanks until after he'd been overthrown, at which point the regime of the Ayatollahs was, of course, sanctioned by everybody, so we kept the money, but also the tanks, which I'm afraid we then, in classic British fashion, we sold the same camel twice, and I think various other countries then bought some of those tanks, including, I fear, the Iraqis. But never mind. So the 400 million pounds from Iran was sitting in an escrow account. Churchill did exactly the same thing, by the way, in 1914 with some Turkish warships. We were making some warships for Turkey. They paid them. They paid us for the warships, and then war broke out. We didn't actually send them the warships. Check it out. He did exactly the same thing. Anyway, it was Iranian money. We just got into a situation where the only way to get this poor woman out of jail in Tehran, and it was, the fault lay entirely with the Iranians. What they were doing was absolutely nauseating. She had done nothing wrong. She was a totally innocent person, but the only way to get her out, I'm afraid, was to settle that debt, which unquestionably we owed to to Tehran. So I would argue in my defense that was a reasonable thing to do, given the um, the the way things were. I mean, she was and there were several other hostages we released at the same time, and but I think that again, where I agreed very much with Trump was in taking a stronger line on Iran, and I think that when you look at what he did with Qasem Soleimani and the head of the IRGC, I think you could argue that very much paid off, and that was the right approach. And I think if you look at what the state of Iran now, you look at the way Iran's been forced to retreat in Syria, the end of Assad, I think definitely you could say that taking a tough line with Iran is the right approach.
Let me just push you just a little bit back on the Iranian. I agree with you that some Democrats, presidential Obama, Biden, took a lighter touch with Iran, gave them money back in various ways. I guess one is, did you worry that by paying them off or doing this trick that it would put a greater target on British people to be hostage again, because they would again seek money, and B, that money would go to Hezbollah? And let me just add a C to that. In light of what Israel has done to Iran, and it kind of decimated them and now putting them on their knees, should the West, should the United States and Britain took a tougher line against Iran from the beginning and stood up to what was, what is a relatively weak power and said, you can't take our citizens?
Yes, but I mean, you have to go back to 1979 and the Jimmy Carter, God rest his soul, who did try to use force to get hostages out of Iran. And I did think of it. I mean, of course I thought of what military options were available to us, but they weren't very good. And I'm just going to be honest with you. It certainly wasn't something that seemed practical, either to us or to the US. So our alternatives were limited. But generally, what you've got to, I think there is a case for being much tougher with Iran and really pushing back. And we've got to face it, that one of the consequences of what we did in the last 20 years in the Middle East has been greatly irrationally to strengthen Iran. Iran has been emboldened and empowered across the in Syria and Yemen, Lebanon. It's been a disaster, and as we can see now, pushing back works. I mean, what Israel has been doing is thoroughly effective, and should be encouraged, I think.
Let me ask you about Ukraine, which you were a strong defender of, and are a strong defender of. I know you respond to it in the book, but it's out there in a lot of forums, this concept that you helped scuttle a deal to end the war. Let me just lay it out there, and you can explain how you believe that's not true.
It's total crap. It's total crap. It's absolute fantasy.
So, but the allegation is that Russia and Ukraine were in early talks for a deal that would end the war, give back.
End the war in what way? End the war in what way? End the war in what way?
Right. They would keep the Donbass region, which they took in Crimea, and Ukraine would renounce NATO. I know. I just want to give you the chance to respond.
What the Russians were asking for was that Ukraine would abandon all prospect of having any kind of destiny in the West, would have become a vassal state, would be controlled. Its military would effectively be controlled by Russia. That Russia would keep its very substantial territorial gains. And don't forget that at the time that I was alleged to have urged them to do this, do a deal, Russia had far more of Ukraine than it currently possesses. It would have been catastrophic for Ukraine, and there was no way that any Ukrainian leader, let alone Volodymyr Zelensky, could have accepted such an agreement, and you know, it would have been the end of Ukraine as an independent country, and it certainly would have been the end of the political end of whoever did that deal with Putin, and you know, but leaving all that aside, I didn't argue either way for the Ukrainians to do a deal or not to do a deal. They were never going to do a deal. They wanted their own country. They wanted freedom. They wanted independence. And when a country wants freedom and independence, you've got a pretty unstoppable force, as we discovered in 1776. You know, with you guys, this thing will only end in one way, and Putin has just totally miscalculated. Of course, you know, it suits him to peddle all sorts of propaganda about deals that Ukraine could have done, and it suits people in the West who are tired of supporting Ukraine to say that there's some truth in this. But the reality is this thing will never be sorted until we recognize Ukraine's right to freedom and independence. And you know, we've done it at several times in the past. We recognized them in 1991. In 2008, NATO said that they should join the NATO alliance. But we've never made good on these promises, and it's been that fatal ambiguity that has encouraged Putin to attack. And I just for American policymakers, you know, this thing can't be fixed by some Camp David-style land for peace deal. That's not the issue. It's not about territory, right? I think people think, oh well, you know, just as you were saying, give Putin the Donbass and Crimea and
I didn't say that. I was just saying that's the allegation. I know you're not. But that's what people, you know, will. That's not how it. That won't fix the problem, because what you'll have is round one to Putin, right? So he holds what he has. He hangs on to what he's conquered by violence and criminal aggression, but he also has the possibility for unlimited further violence and further manipulation of Ukraine, further destabilization and aggression. And therefore, the only way to fix this thing is to make a statement about destiny. It's not about territory, it's about destiny. It's not about territory, it's about destiny. We've got to say that Ukraine is part of the Western club. And that means the EU, but it also means NATO. And we've said it before, it turned out we didn't mean it. And we've got to mean it this time. The only way to fix this thing is to say that, you know, and I can imagine a solution that says, well, we'll have a ceasefire if and only if all the parts of Ukraine that are currently controlled by the Ukrainians are guaranteed by Western defense guarantees, whether the Americans are involved or not, and we do not in any way prejudice the Ukrainian claim to their entire territory. I mean, maybe you could get some sort of deal like that, but it would have to involve a promise of security and Western-backed security for Ukraine. Otherwise, it's worthless, and we will achieve nothing. And this thing will just go on and on and on, and Putin and the Russians will continue to attack that country. And you know, Donald Trump is right to highlight the hundreds of thousands of people who've died and the appalling casualties and suffering that are going on both sides. The only way to fix that is to have clarity about what Ukraine is. If you say that Ukraine is part of a Russian sphere of influence, or you fail to sort out the destiny of Ukraine, then you're consigning that country to decades of conflict and suffering.
and you're making the West look weak all around the periphery of the former Soviet Union. You have got to be clear with the world about what Ukraine is, and it's part of it. That means it's part of the West. It's part of NATO.
What do you say to those many around Donald Trump, not all, but some who are afraid that by doing that you might actually engage in a hot war with Russia,
Come
potentially a
on, the
nuclear
Russians. You said
threat?
but Jamie, you said yourself, and these guys the paper tiger. He couldn't even keep Bashar al-Assad. He got beaten in Syria by a bunch of Bashi bazooks from Aleppo. I mean, it's just he can't even win in Ukraine. They haven't even taken Pokrovsk yet, right? The Ukrainians have taken a huge chunk of Kursk. I mean, give me a break. These guys, he's relying on North Korean janissaries to come and do his soldiering. He's a total paper tiger.
You've met Vladimir
He's very, very apprehensive. Look, I mean, I think Donald Trump, the reason I'm optimistic about this whole situation is I think Donald Trump has the calm and the decisiveness to sort this out. And I think I don't think he will want the West to be humiliated by Putin by surrendering Ukraine. And I don't think he will want America to be humiliated. And above all, he won't want Donald Trump to be humiliated by surrendering Ukraine. It's just not going to happen.
Will you say something about you've met Vladimir Zelensky? A lot of people in the U.S. It baffles me that you can have different positions on Ukraine, but it seems that Zelensky is a pretty brave figure. A lot of people call him corrupt and a negative.
What baffles you about my position on Ukraine?
No. It baffles me that some in the U.S. Call Zelensky some type of bad figure.
Yeah.
What is your impressions of Zelensky?
So look, I just think I got on very well with him. I think we got to be serious about Ukraine. Ukraine does have a problem with corruption and has historically for decades. I don't think it's as bad as Russia. But it needs to improve. But the only way
Zelensky himself is corrupt.
No, I have no evidence for that. Whatever. No. I think what's the difference between Russia and Ukraine? Russia is run by a guy who genuinely shoots his opponents and sends them to gulags. Ukraine and who knows the outcome of elections long in advance because he fixes them. Ukraine is run by a guy who used to be the voice of Paddington the Bear in the Ukrainian version of the movie, and who came to power totally democratically, going on TV pretending to play the piano with his genitals. What type of government do I prefer? I obviously prefer Ukraine. I think I can relate to it. It's a freedom. Ukraine produces a lot of freedom-loving, eccentric people. It produces, Eurovision song winners, song contest winners, and champion boxers, and God knows what. Look at Ukraine has the merit of being a free, yes, it has a problem with corruption, though I think in some ways it's getting better. But it's basically a free democratic country, and Russia is not. Russia really is a tyranny.
One more question for you to respond to, and then I'll go to my closing questions, which I think you'll find fun.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you respond to this. You speak very movingly of the Queen in your book. In fact, one of the best parts of Unleashed, I think, is the stories you tell of the Queen and the leaders that she knew, and some of the stories that she has about them, and reminding you names of long ago, African leaders that she met. But there was a report that on her deathbed, with a group of family and trusted personal aides gathered around her, despite your fondness for her, she reportedly said, "At least I won't have that idiot organizing my funeral now," and said that
it was total fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news. No. I think that she knew, would have known perfectly well the Prime Minister doesn't organise anybody's funeral. It's not done by the the Prime Minister anyway. It's done by the old Marshal or General, those sorts of people. So that's a made up thing. But it's absolutely true that we had it was one of the greatest privileges of my job, or any Prime Minister's job, to see the Queen and to get the benefit of her wisdom every week. And it was a sort of therapy. It was kind of like a cut price psycho. No, I never had psychotherapy, but I imagine, it was brilliant, because she, there was nothing so appalling, or no confession so embarrassing that you didn't feel you could tell the Queen. And she she was like, it was like being able to tell your favorite grandmother things you'd never dare tell your own parents. And and she was very, very wise, and she had views about other foreign leaders, which she unquestionably did. I'm far too discreet to tell you what they were, but she what she could do was locate any problem in its historical context. And so, like, on Ukraine, for instance, I mean, just a couple of days before she died, I saw her, and I was complaining about how difficult it was to persuade the Indians to take our view of Ukraine. And she immediately said, "Ah, yes, I remember back in the 50s, Jawaharlal Nehru told me, Your Majesty, you must understand that India will always side with Russia. Some things just are; they never change." And she said, and she told me that as a way of, which has a large element of historical truth. I mean, sadly for Indian defense procurement industry, which relies on lead useless Russian weapons, but she told me that as a way of consoling me, and trying to put things in their historical context. And she knew every U.S. president since Eisenhower. She'd met every French president since Charles de Gaulle, and it was just wonderful to have the benefit of her wisdom.
Let me close on these, Boris, more philosophical questions. I think I know the answer to the first one.
Yeah.
What historic leader do you most admire?
Well, I've got a great sorry, I'm being closed down here by higher powers. I've got a great admiration for Pericles of Athens, one of my heroes of my youth, whose speech on democracy I read when I was very young. Well, the speech that Thucydides puts into his mouth on the difference between a democracy and an oligarchy, difference between Athens and Sparta. It's a truly wonderful speech, which I really recommend to everybody. About how we believe that anybody should be able to achieve what they want. We have a system that encourages everybody of talent. It's a beautiful, beautiful speech, and could be made by a great U.S. president today. And look, I mean, it's no secret I'm a fan of Winston Churchill, as you are, and I think that he did the right thing. His greatest achievement was really the same as Volodymyr Zelensky's achievement, which was to get the US involved and keep the US involved. That is the key thing.
I'll leave it there for our next.
I've got to read a book. So
absolutely, Boris Johnson, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Jamie, it's an honor to meet you. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on your show.